So today, e46 M3 front brake upgrade. This is a Laguna Seca e46 M3 convertible with the standard 325mm discs and original caliper setup. And today we will be installing f8x front brake kit onto this. So 380mm discs with 4-piston brembo calipers. And let me show you what you need for this upgrade. So to start with, you need the f8x 370, 380 calipers. You'll need a set of f8x pads for these calipers. In our case, we have a set of M pads, which are still in great condition, and we're going to be using them. And a set of f8x discs, so 380mm floating discs. So these discs were actually skimmed and they're still within the right thickness spec, so we'll be reusing them. You'll need a set of custom brake hoses. So these are Hell Performance brake hoses with E90 end fixings, and they're 30mm longer than the standard e46 M3 hoses to accommodate the new calipers. A fitting kit, and of course you will need a set of 2.5 to 3mm washer spacers. And the reason why you need these is to get the caliper sitting directly center across the discs. So what you're basically doing is you're bringing the disc outwards by 2.5mm just so it can line up directly with the center of the caliper. There are alternative ways of making this happen, one of which is machining the caliper down by a few millimeters. So what people tend to do is they tend to machine these tabs down by 2.5mm and bolt the caliper on. But I'm personally not in favor of such solution because it weakens these ribs here, the caliper mounting points, admittedly not significantly, but it still is a structurally critical component which I don't advise removing any material off of. And secondly, a lot of the time when the caliper mounting points are machined, people don't take into account that the steel insert is actually shorter than the caliper, and they machine them flush. So what happens in that case is you don't get the necessary clamp load because the insert is steel with a different hardness, and the caliper casting itself is aluminium, so the whole point of this insert is to clamp the aluminium part in between the two steel parts, so the knuckle on the car and the back face of the insert. Hence, as you can see here, the insert is actually about 1mm shorter than the caliper itself. So if you were to go down the route of machining these tabs down, make sure that you machine the caliper insert, or the caliper bushing if you like, by the same amount, and you still have it that it's shorter than the caliper itself. And the third way of doing this upgrade is by spacing the actual discs themselves. But the issue with doing it that way is if you space the discs by 2.5mm, the centering spigot, which is this bit here, is not that wide, and when the disc gets spaced out, it has nothing to be centered on, and you also lose the actual length of the spigot for the wheel to sit on. So ideally, what you want to do is to space out the actual hub using these washers that I just showed you, rather than doing these two other ways. And now, to space out the hub, what you need to do is remove the old brakes. So fairly straightforward: remove the discs, remove the calipers, remove the hub by undoing this big nut here. It's a 46mm or a 45mm, I'm not sure, so check which one it is and order the appropriate size socket. Remove the hub, and this is where this washer spacer needs to go on. So that goes on there. Then you can reinstall the hub, torque it down, and then lock the hub by punching it in around the sides. Right, and this is what it should look like, all bolted on. Now, that's fairly center, equal gap there, equal gap there. Everything's tightened down. The hose is bolted down and tightened over here. Everything is fine. And now we can just bleed it, put the pads in, put the wheels on, and it should be finished. And this is it all bled, tightened down and finished. So just a point about the fasteners, the bolts, you can use either the standard e46 M3 bolts or you can use the f30, f80 bolts. The e46 M3 bolts are ever so slightly longer, but they still do the job, so that's not a problem, you can use them. But I recommend using the F chassis bolts. And going back to the point about spacing out the disc and the hub itself, so putting a spacer in between the disc and the hub, about losing the real estate of the centering spigot of the disc. So as you can see here, there's very little engagement between the centering spigot of the disc and the hub without any spacing. So if you bring the disc outwards, you will completely lose this and the disc will not be center. There's an argument to be made that it will still center on these studs, but I don't recommend doing that. So in my opinion, the easiest way to do this and the safest way to do this is what I've just shown, with spacing out the actual hub itself away from the knuckle with a little shim. The shim itself is M50 by 2.5 millimeters, I believe, and you can order them online for, I think, about £3 or £4 each. So it's quite a cost-effective way of doing it. And a point about the brake hose is, what you really want to do is use braided brake lines, ideally Hell Performance with rotating unions, and you should really get them about 30 to 50 mil longer, and you should really use E90 end unions. The reason I say that is E46 end unions are quite long, and the angle at which the line goes into the caliper is different on the E46 to the f80. So if you have quite a long union coming out of the caliper, it stretches the brake hose, where the E90 unions are quite short, and it allows the brake hose to run in the correct way. So there you go, all done, that's it. On to the next one, and hopefully at some point we can cover the rear end brake upgrade on the E46 M3.